Hi, I'm Kevin from Chesapeake Figs here in Chesapeake City, Maryland, over on the East Coast. And we are going to do a video between the two of us, from me in Chesapeake City and Mark from Dingdong's garden over out there on the northwest coast. And we are going to talk about a couple different varieties of mulberries that we both grow that we really like because they are easy to root and there's a very high success rate rooting them, and they're also just great mulberries in some way or another. I wanted to start off the discussion by focusing on one that I actually bought a cutting off of Mark. It was 2 or 3 years ago when he does his winter cutting sale. I got a cutting of the Riviera mulberry off of Mark, and that's actually one of the trees behind me. These are my rows of figs here, and this biggest tree sticking out here is the Riviera mulberry. Even at about 2.5 years old, this Riviera is a monster. I would estimate probably 18 feet tall, 16 to 18 feet tall. And if you notice, this is an issue I have with mulberry growing where I am, is this middle section just has a couple small leaves and then the rest of it is dense. And that's because the deer like to focus in on this range from about knee height to shoulder height. But one of the great things about mulberries is they do outgrow that. And that stuff up there, most of the leaves of the tree, they can't even get to. But Riviera is a great variety. It is one of the most vigorous ones I've grown. This Riviera and a Shangri-La I have, this is the thickness of my wrist just about. And this one I rooted, I got the cutting from Mark in the winter of 2024. So this is an excellent variety. It produces a purplish lavender color berry that I would consider to be almost a white mulberry. It doesn't look white, it has a purplishness to it, but it has more of that light sweet taste that the white mulberries have. And one of the reasons it's on this list right now is because it roots as a cutting. A lot of mulberry varieties don't root as a cutting, but Riviera does. And once you get it going, man, does it take off. I had this one for the first year in 2024 in a good sized pot, and it just kept outgrowing the pot and needing to be up potted. And at some point I was like, I have to do something with it. So I stuck it right in ground here just to see what it would do. And it took a little bit to get going, but this is only a 2-year-old tree. So that's one of the fascinations I have with mulberries in general. This one and Shangri-La are the two that I grow like this. And I believe they're probably at least part Morris rubra. The shiny leaf looks like Morris alba, but the big dinner plate style leaves look a little bit Morris rubra. So I assume it's a Morris rubra, Morris alba hybrid. And it is just a beautiful grower, a pretty plant, and the berries are just excellent. It's like white and purple color. I'll include a picture or a quick sample from a video I did before on them. And it's just a great variety. If you're looking to grow varieties of mulberries that you can root on their own roots and don't need to be grafted to a rootstock, Riviera is one that I would recommend. And I wanted to bring this one up first just because this is one I got as a cutting off of Mark 2 years ago from Dingdong's garden. And it's doing great here in Chesapeake City, Maryland, and one that we would recommend.
Well, this is Mark at Dingdong's garden over here in the maritime Pacific Northwest. And I got to say, Kevin, I really enjoyed your video, not only because I totally agree that Riviera is an easy to root variety, but I also got a kick out of listening to the cicadas. I haven't heard those in many years. And your place looks so lush. You probably get a lot of rain, but out here we don't get any. We got a 1/4 inch last week in the middle of July, which is very unusual. We don't get any rain at all. But mulberry trees just want to thrive. And the one I'm going to talk about right now is maple leaf mulberry. It is one of the first varieties that I tried to root. I got my cuttings from Marta at Really Good Plants, probably 6 years ago. And it spoiled me because they rooted right away. I had 100% off my first batch. and ever since then, it's always rooted very easily. Not perfect. I don't think any mulberry would be perfect, but it's got a really good propagation rate, and it's vigorous. Unlike other varieties of fruit trees, I've noticed that mulberries, the vigor in the rootstocks of all of them are about the same. Sometimes you'll get slower growth, but for me, I think that's usually because of the fruit set is heavy, or there's something in the upper part of the plant slowing things down. But in general, whatever you graft onto, I find is going to have a good, it's going to feed a lot of water and nutrients up to the top. Because of its ability to easily root, it's a good candidate for rootstock, which is true for Riviera or any of the others that we would mention here about easy propagation. Now, like Riviera, maple leaf does give you a nice mulberry. It's longer and a little bigger than a typical mulberry, but it's not, there's just not many of them. And that kind of speaks to another thing that I've discovered over the years, is that some mulberry trees are more shy than others in terms of fruiting. Either they don't put out a lot of fruit on any branches, or some of the branches are fruiting, or you have to wait a couple years in order to get fruit. So there's a pretty big variety. But often we will wait for 2 or even 3 years before we're able to confirm that the variety that we received from somebody is actually what it is. So sometimes it's a long wait. So if you're looking for another mulberry that's easy to root and does have fruit, or perhaps you just need something for rootstock for grafting, maple leaf is a good option. And I'll send it back to you, Kevin, for the third variety.
Hey Mark, I just watched your video and your maple leaf looks great. It's nice and filled in plant, and it's doing really well, especially with how little water you get there. That's amazing that you guys get less than an inch in the month. We usually get closer to 5 inches in the month of July, but that's amazing. It's probably helpful that mulberries do send out a pretty deep root system, and they like to send their roots deeper than some other plants to help you not have to get as much water during the growing season. And they do absolutely like to grow. And your maple leaf actually has a similar leaf shape to the one that I'm going to bring up, that I'm sitting under right now. I'm here in the deep shade in a part of my yard that probably gets 2 hours of light or less a day, and this mulberry tree here still does very well. This one here is Oscar, and it's one of my favorites. One of my favorite mulberries all around, but one of my favorites also partly because of the discussion we're having, which is that it is one that will root relatively easily from cutting. And any mulberry that'll do that can be used as rootstock, just a great mulberry in general. Oscar is, there's a car peeling out. It is very cold hardy. We've had it in ground here, right at this spot. This is the first Oscar I've planted, and this one's been here for about 4 or 5 years now, and hasn't really had any issues. We've had a couple branches die back in the winter one year, but we've gotten down to 4 degrees, 5 degrees Fahrenheit in the winter with no dieback. So it's pretty cold hardy. It handles, this low light situation really well. It's probably not as productive as it is in an open field type situation, but in 2 hours of light a day to be able to get berries is pretty amazing, to get any kind of fruit in that little bit of light. But my real reason for picking Oscar is actually Oscar is one of my favorite tasting mulberries. It is a fairly normal size. It's a dark color. I'll post a picture of it right about here. And it just has a flavor I really like. It's not aggressively sweet like some of the white mulberries can be. It just has like a really well-rounded berry flavor that not all of them have. And it always ends up being on my list when I try it as one of my favorites. The leaf shape does sometimes remind me a little bit of maple leaf too. Not completely, but it tends to have a nice leaf shape. and it gets an interesting coloration to it in the fall and winter sometimes, right as the leaves start to fall off. In fact, I like Oscar so much as a mulberry tree that I planted several more of them in ground last year. These ones are in my fig orchard section over here, and they are doing well. I have to cage these guys in a bit to keep the deer off the main part of the plant. And let me show you a little bit of what I was talking about with the weird pattern they can get. They can get this strange pattern when they're a little bit stressed, but it's actually really pretty. And they tend to get it in the fall, and they get it in sometimes the heat of summer when they're a little stressed. Mostly happens on my Oscar trees that are a little bit younger. So this is a younger tree than the one we were just looking at. The one we were just looking at doesn't really get that anymore. This one also gets a lot more sun. Instead of getting 2 hours of sun a day, this one's getting 8 to 10 hours of sun a day. But another great variety for rooting. You know, you get a lot of cuttings out of something like this. And I planted this one here, and I planted another one right over here in this section of the orchard last year. And this was a baby plant last year, so this cage is around it just so that it can get its roots established before it gets munched down to the bone. The deer will do that here, and they have done that already this year. You can see all these stems are missing, but for this is fine. It already produced a few fruit this year, so they've all been fruiting for me relatively early. Oscar is not the most productive variety I have, but it is probably my favorite taste-wise, and it roots on its own roots, which is just amazing for a mulberry. So that's my next variety, and that's one I would also recommend to everybody. Back over to you, Mark.
Kevin, Oscar's a great pick. It's always rooted well for us too, and I like it. It's got the same shape leaves, very similar to maple leaf, but kind of a little more pronounced and a little less, fewer lobes. But what a great tree. Grows like crazy, has good fruit, but it's a little sensitive to our temperature here. So we're zone 8A, and it makes it through the winter, but sometimes I wonder if it's gonna. But anyway, so Oscar, great selection, and let's go on to my next one here. My second type of mulberry that roots well for us are what I would group into these are varieties that branch during the growing season, and I won't go into that topic now, but because they branch during the growing season, they have like huge amounts of fruit, and these are dwarf everbearing, Lakeland, Jan's Best, which is the ones we have here on our farm, and also similar to that are varieties like Thai Dwarf, World's Best Mulberry, Isai Dwarf. There's quite a few that are that if you were to look at from a distance, they'd all kind of look the same. But the only ones that have survived here in our zone 8A environment that can get down to about 10 degrees Fahrenheit are Jan's Best, Lakeland, and Dwarf Everbearing. Here, I mean, it's probably unrecognizable to those of you in a warm area that grow something like Jan's Best or Dwarf Everbearing. But these all root very well. I've used them this year for rootstock, and I will use them again in the future. They just perform great. And the other thing too is, like, if you don't have one of these branching in the summer types, you should consider it, because and you will recognize it when you see, like, particularly if you see Jan's videos on her channel down in Florida. She gets great growth and fantastic looking trees, and they're loaded with fruit. So you should definitely have one of these in your collection.
The last mulberry variety I wanted to bring up as easy to root here for me is Shangri-La. Now, I know there are a couple different variations of Shangri-La, but the one that I'm growing here that I got from a grower in California maybe 5 years ago as a cutting has done very well for me for rooting. It's easy to root, it's cold hardy, survives every winter, down to 4 or 5 degrees Fahrenheit with no issues. See, the birds are loud today on the boats. And it is just a crazy grower. This is a couple years old, maybe 3 or 4 years old. And it is, I prune it heavily every year. And I sometimes prune it multiple times a year. It has these big dinosaur-like leaves. I have enormous hands, and the leaves, some of them get bigger as they go up the tree. So the leaves are more than 14 inches. This one here gets very little light for the amount of leaves it creates. That's the only gap where it gets sun throughout the day. The rest of the day, it's in nearly complete shade. So the fact that it does this well and still produces hundreds of Shangri-La mulberries that are a little larger and fatter than the Oscar I was just talking about, and a little more tart, I would say, for Shangri-La, which is good. It's good to have the variation. But Shangri-La roots pretty easily from cutting. The deer, actually, it's one of the deer's favorite if you see these lower branches here. But as you can see, that mulberries kind of grow out of deer pressure. When they get to a certain size, the deer can have what they can reach, and it's not going to cause too much damage. It's almost a free pruning, so you could get into the tree easier. But Shangri-La to me is always fascinating. It would make a great shade tree because the size of these leaves and just the dense canopy they create, they almost block out the sun where you put them, and they can get to be really tall. But like all mulberries, I can cut this off at whatever height I want. In another couple weeks, I could come in here and snip this off at about 8 feet tall, and it will just get bushier and produce even more fruit next year. But they can get to be huge, and it is one of my favorites. Here's an example of how vigorous they are. These 3 here are ones that are about the size that I sell, and they are from just little 2.5 months ago. So these were cut off that tree 2.5 months ago, or these might have been dormant cuttings that I rooted, which is more likely. But both work for me. I have luck with rooting dormant season cuttings off of Shangri-La and rooting cuttings that were coming right off of a tree that I'm summer spring pruning. Sometimes a great time to prune these guys is right after they finished fruiting, and you want to sort of divert some of their growth so that they don't get to be 20 foot tall like the one I was just showing. And I do have multiple Shangri-La out here in the fig orchard area too. And these also, similarly to the other ones, get sort of munched on by deer in their range. And then you can see all the big leaves as they get taller. So far the leaves haven't gotten quite as big for me out here in the orchard as they do in the darker light situation. And I do like the fruit and growth pattern of Shangri-La enough to have it in a couple parts of my orchard too. These guys got planted last year. This plant here was already 2 years old when I planted it, so it had a little head start, but it's got that same sort of pattern. Maybe the leaves aren't quite as big as the one I have in the darker spot over there. And the deer do definitely get to this one a bit, but it grows really well, produces some great fruit. And it's just a really, really cool mulberry variety. It's similar to one that I just actually got a first cutting of this year called Hartoot that I also rooted from cutting, and I'm giving a try to. But it has that really large leaves, really, really fast growth, really quick. This plant wasn't, you know, this 4 feet of growth here was just from the last 2 months. And it's just a great plant, one that you can definitely root by cutting. And some of the ones that I can root by cutting, I would never graft, just because it's another step, it's another amount of time. So yeah, great, easy to root variety. This is another one I have. I actually have these on the border of my orchard, hoping that if the deer eat enough of these gigantic leaves, that they will leave my figs alone. And the funny thing with the mulberries is that they fruit so early that this is done for me by July, and that's before fig season. So definitely get lots of great fruit out of them. They're productive, they're fast growing, and they're fun to root plants. And then They seem to be what the deer focus on over here. But that's okay with me, because after they've fruited, just like any other mulberry variety, you can prune them like crazy, and it just makes them do better. You know, they're great plants to get used to pruning. Just like my hardy kiwi vines, you can kind of hack these to bits and decide what shape you want them to be, what size you want them to be. You can cut them multiple times a year, and it doesn't do too much damage to them like it would with, you know, you can't do that with an apple tree. But figs and mulberries, you can go crazy pruning. And then when you do go crazy pruning them, you've got lots of extra cuttings to root of these specific varieties we're talking about in this video. Okay, back over to you, Mark.
All right, thanks, Kevin. And this brings us to our last variety that we find that roots easily is Walker's Greenstock. And you probably never heard of this. What this is a variety, and you can just kind of see how vigorous it is here. This is a variety that I received under a different name, and it turned out, you know, we grow out our mulberry trees, and we wait sometimes years for them to fruit to prove that is the variety that we expect. But in this case, this variety just gives, like, you know, an occasional mulberry that's of no significance, but it grows like crazy and it roots like crazy. This will probably be our go-to mulberry tree for rooting rootstock. You could also use it for livestock, for feeding livestock. But I think our main purpose for this will be for growing your own rootstock. And this winter, we're going to do a little experiment. We're gonna try to take a batch of mulberry cuttings and put them in the cooler at 37 degrees. We'll pull out the ones we want to use for rootstock, root them, and then once they're well rooted, we'll go ahead and graft on top of them with some varieties that don't root well. And if that works, that'd be great, because then that would indicate that you don't need to go out and get separate rootstock and wait for that vendor to send it to you. You can just buy cuttings, grow the ones you want for rootstock, and then a month later you can graft onto them. So anyway, so that's my last one for today. It's called Walker's Greenstock, and that kind of wraps it up for today. Thanks, Kevin, for doing this. This has been fun. Sometimes it's tough to find people in the neighborhood to chat about mulberries, or they get kind of weary of it. So it's always fun to find somebody somewhere who's interested in them, and we can chat about them. And thanks to everybody else for supporting our channels, and we'll see you back out there. Everybody have a great rest of your summer.
I just want to do a quick bonus at the end here. Mark's description of how he uses that variety for rootstock was so effective that in the middle of editing the video and putting it together, I actually came out to my orchard to check out Riviera and Shangri-La and cut a big branch or two off them to divide up into, 10 or so pieces each to get about 20 rootstock going that'll be ready for next year. So when I do my grafting in spring, I'm going to do some more grafting onto Riviera and Shangri-La. I usually use seedlings that I find around, because we find so many seedlings around just about anywhere. So yeah, doing some rootstock just from rooted cuttings would be another interesting idea. And then, I'll have some more Riviera and Shangri-La to sell too, which is always good. But they grow so fast. This one here is so big. I don't know, I would say, 20 feet tall, 15, 20 feet tall. And the video that I did on Riviera was just from a week or two ago, and it grew another 4 feet. So while I'm out here, I'm going to cut some off this. These are the two I cut off of Riviera. Get an idea for how tall they are. They're about head height on me. Full beautiful leaves. And the Shangri-La is even taller than that Riviera. 23, 24 feet, something like that. And this branch here is covering one of my Detrace Esplates and ground figs, so that one's got to go. So I'll cut a few branches off of this guy too. And this is the size of some of the Shangri-La branches I took off, so even bigger. And the leaves on these guys are huge. Always so big. So I'll have lots of cuttings that I could turn into some rootstock for next year and some more rooted plants. Great idea, Mark. And I hope everybody else gets as much use out of this video as I did from having a good conversation with Mark about mulberries.